My name is Lauren. I'm 28 years old, live just outside of Seattle, and for most of my life, I've followed the path that was laid out for me. Steady, predictable, safe. I studied communications, landed a good job at a software company, and stayed close to my family. The kind of daughter who never gave anyone a reason to worry. When I met Jordan 2 years ago, everything started to shift. He was different, intelligent but quiet, kind but private. There was a steadiness about him that felt like home. We moved in together after 9 months. A year later, he proposed in the middle of a snowy weekend trip to Leavenworth, Washington. I said yes before he even finished the question. We decided to host an engagement party at my parents' house. Just family and a few close friends. Nothing flashy. Just love, good food, and toasts under fairy lights in my parents' backyard. But what happened that night changed everything. Before I go on, I want to say something. If you've ever had a moment where your life cracked open, where something or someone you trusted suddenly didn't make sense anymore, then I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. I share raw, emotional stories like this one every week. Not perfect tales, but real ones, from people who've had to rebuild after truth shattered the surface. And if you've ever looked around and wondered, am I the only one? You're not. You're among friends here. Now let me tell you how it all started. The party was perfect. My mom strung white lights along the back fence, my aunt brought her famous lemon cake, and my little cousin played violin during dinner. Jordan, always slightly overwhelmed by attention, handled the evening well, smiling politely, keeping one hand on my back every time someone came over to congratulate us. And then, during dessert, my Uncle Dan stood up with a drink in his hand and said, "I want to make a quick toast." He's my mom's younger brother. Funny, warm, a bit of a storyteller. He always had a knack for pulling out old family photos and making everyone laugh. Before Lauren was born, he said, there was a time when I used to think I was the coolest guy in the family. Then this little girl came along and took all my spotlight. So, to humble myself, I brought a photo to remind her fiancé that yes, we all have awkward pasts. Everyone chuckled. I smiled, already blushing. Uncle Dan held up a framed photo. I immediately recognized myself in it. Maybe 5 years old, hair in crooked pigtails, missing my 2 front teeth. Standing next to me was my childhood babysitter, Allison. She was 16 in the photo, wearing a flannel shirt and a shy smile. She used to pick me up from preschool when my mom worked late. She braided my hair, read me stories, taught me how to float in the pool. She was like a big sister. Until one day she just stopped coming. Uncle Dan said, "This is from the summer of '99. Remember her, Lore?" Smiled. Of course. That's Allison. And then I felt Jordan's hand slip from my waist. Turned. His face was pale, absolutely drained of color. His eyes locked on the photo like it was a gun pointed at him. I whispered, "Jordan." He didn't answer. Then he said in a voice low and tight, "I know that face from court." A chill ran through the entire table. I blinked. "What?" Jordan turned to me, still frozen. "That's her. From the trial. She was one of the witnesses." I stood completely still. My ears rang. "What trial?" I asked, barely able to breathe. He didn't answer. Everyone was staring. My uncle slowly lowered the photo. "What trial, Jordan?" He ran a hand over his face. I didn't know her name. I didn't know you knew her." Then he looked at me, and I'll never forget what he said next. "I never told you everything about what happened when I was 16. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the garden lights and the clink of someone nervously setting down a wine glass. My hands were trembling. Jordan, my fiancé, the man I was supposed to build a life with, stood frozen in front of a photograph from my childhood, staring at a face I hadn't seen in over 20 years. Allison, my babysitter, the girl who used to sing to me, the one who used to braid my hair while we watched cartoons. Jordan's voice cut through the stillness, strained and shaking. Her name wasn't Allison at the trial. She used her middle name. But I'd recognize that face anywhere. My uncle, now realizing the gravity of the moment, slowly set the photo frame down on the table. "What trial?" my mom asked quietly, her face pale. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I turned to Jordan, heart thudding. "You need to explain," I said. "Now." Jordan sat down hard on one of the folding chairs, elbows on his knees, rubbing his hands together like he could scrub the past off his skin. "I was 16, he began. "It was my junior year of high school. There was this kid in our neighborhood, Ryan Coster. He was a year older than me. Bigger. He had this group of guys who followed him around like bodyguards." Jordan paused, swallowing hard. "One night Ryan and two of those guys jumped a girl in the parking lot behind the bowling alley. I didn't see the attack happen, but I saw them dragging her back there." He looked up at me. I didn't stop it. The words hit me like cold water. "I was there," he said, "and I froze. I didn't help her. I didn't call the police. I just stood there. My throat was dry. And Allison. She was the one they hurt," he whispered. I couldn't breathe. She testified. Said there had been someone else, someone who just watched. She didn't know my name. I wasn't charged. But I was brought in. Questioned. My parents hired a lawyer. Nothing stuck. I was labeled a witness. Not an accomplice. He looked down. But I was more than that. The garden lights blurred in my vision as tears welled in my eyes. "I should have done something," he continued. "I was scared. I was 16. But that doesn't excuse it. I've lived with it every day since." Behind us, someone whispered something. Chairs creaked. I heard my mom tell everyone to give us space. People slowly got up and moved inside, awkward and silent, like mourners leaving a funeral before the body's even cold. Now it was just me and Jordan on the patio. "I didn't know who she was until I saw that photo," he said. "But the moment I saw her face, I remembered. She looked straight at me that night." My stomach churned. "And you never told me." "I didn't know how," he said. "I was afraid you'd look at me the way you're looking at me right now." I stood up. "How exactly am I looking at you?" He winced. "Like you don't know me." I shook my head, blinking fast. "That's because I don't." That night, I didn't go home with Jordan. I stayed at my parents' house, curled up on the guest bed, my mom sitting quietly beside me like I was 6 again and afraid of the dark. She didn't say much, just held my hand. At 2 a.m., I scrolled through my old Facebook photos, searching for Allison. There were barely any. I searched her full name, Allison Jane Carter, but nothing came up. I tried Allison Carter plus my hometown plus the year plus anything I could think of. Still nothing. But I remembered something suddenly. Her aunt's name was Dana. She used to pick Allison up sometimes. Dana had a sunflower tattoo on her wrist. So I searched Dana Carter Seattle. It led me to an old blog. Buried deep in the archives was a post from 2010, a fundraiser for my niece Allison, survivor and warrior. No last name. No contact info. But at the bottom was a link. It opened to a public page. One dedicated to survivors of abuse and violence. And there, in the list of contributors, was a name I hadn't heard in years. J. Carter. Click. A short bio. Writer. Speaker. Advocate. Survivor. And a recent event listing. Speaking on campus safety. A.J. Carter at Western Washington University. Thursday, 7 p.m. My blood went cold. That was 2 days from now. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I packed a bag and told my mom I needed time to think. Jordan called twice. I didn't answer. I needed silence. I needed space. More than that, I needed answers. And there was only one person who could give them to me. The drive to Western Washington University took a little over an hour. I made it without music, without podcasts. Just the sound of tires humming on pavement and my thoughts chasing themselves in circles. Jordan hadn't called again, but he didn't need to. His silence sat in the passenger seat next to me like a second presence. I didn't know what I was going to say to her, if she even agreed to talk. What do you say to someone who unknowingly connected your childhood innocence with your adult relationship? Someone who had once braided your hair and years later, stood in court trying to piece herself back together. I just knew I needed to see her. I needed the truth. Not the filtered, reluctant version Jordan had given me on my parents' patio, but the truth from the person who lived it. The auditorium was medium-sized, filled with maybe 50 students and faculty. I slipped into a back row, hood up, trying to disappear. She walked on stage with a microphone clipped to her shirt. Her hair was shorter now, her face more angular, but I knew immediately. It was Allison. Her voice was calm, grounded. She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize. She spoke with the quiet intensity of someone who's repeated their story 100 times. Not because they want to, but because they have to. I was 16, she said. And I thought I was safe walking home that night. She told her story. Not all the details, she didn't need to. The room felt heavy with every word. She mentioned the trial. The years of silence. The work it took just to feel her feet on the ground again. Then she said something that froze my blood. There were 3 boys involved. 2 who attacked me. 1 who watched and walked away. I don't know what hurt more. What happened in that alley, or the way he turned his back and pretended I didn't exist. The room held its breath. I used to have dreams about that 3rd boy, she said. He wasn't the monster. But he could have stopped the monsters. And he didn't. She didn't name him. She didn't need to. I knew who she meant. After the talk, I waited at the edge of the stage while students approached her with quiet praise and tentative questions. I felt out of place like a trespasser. When the crowd thinned, I finally walked up. She looked at me, brow furrowed. You look familiar. I nodded, my voice thin. Lauren. From years ago. You used to babysit me. Her eyes softened with slow recognition. Oh my God. Lauren Marshall. Yeah. We stood there for a moment, the weight of 20 years hovering between us. I know this is probably a lot, I said, but I was wondering if we could talk. Somewhere private. She paused, then nodded. There's a cafe across the street. Give me 5 minutes. At the cafe, we sat in the corner by a window. I wrapped my hands around my coffee just to stop them from shaking. I'm engaged, I said. To Jordan Wells. Her eyes darkened, but she didn't flinch. I figured that's why you're here. I didn't know, I said. Until that photo. Until he recognized you. He told me some of it. But I needed to hear it from you. She stared at me for a long time, then nodded. Okay. And so she told me. More than what she'd said on stage. About the fear. The trial. How Jordan hadn't touched her, but had seen everything and did nothing. How she'd looked at him that night, directly in the eye, begging him to intervene. And how he looked away. I always wondered if he thought I deserved it, she said. Or if he was just too scared. I couldn't answer. I didn't know. I don't think he's evil, she said. But I do think he chose comfort over courage. And that choice still haunts people who didn't have the privilege of walking away. That sentence hit me like a wave. 'Cause I had loved him. Truly. Deeply. But love doesn't erase truth. And the truth was, the man I was about to marry once stood by and did nothing while someone I loved, even as a child, was hurt beyond repair. Allison leaned forward. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I know. But you asked for the truth. And that was mine. I swallowed hard. Thank you. As we stood to leave, she touched my arm gently. You deserve someone who's brave, she said. Not perfect. But brave. I didn't cry until I got to the car. And even then, I wasn't crying for Jordan. I was crying for the little girl in that photo. The one who thought she was safe in the world. And for the woman she had to become to survive the day she learned she wasn't. When I got home that night, Jordan was waiting on the porch of my apartment. He stood when he saw my car pull in. His hands deep in his pockets like a child about to be scolded. I didn't get out right away. I just stared at him through the windshield for a minute, watching his breath fog the cold night air, watching his shoulders slump the way they always did when he felt cornered. Eventually I opened the door. You talked to her, he said before I even reached the steps. He nodded. I did. He looked away. I figured you would. I needed to. Silence. Then he asked, almost in a whisper, "What did she say?" I stepped up onto the porch but didn't go inside. "She told me the truth." He looked up, eyes tired. "I told you the truth too." I shook my head. "You told me your version. The version that still makes you the scared teenager. The passive witness. But not the man who could have screamed. Or grabbed someone. Or called for help. I was a scared teenager." "I know. But that doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't undo what she lived with because you didn't act." Jordan exhaled, shaky. "So what now?" Pause. "I don't know," I said. "But I do know I need space." His expression cracked. "You're breaking off the engagement." I didn't answer right away. Because I wasn't sure either. I hadn't come to that decision fully. But I also hadn't come back ready to pretend nothing had changed. "I'm not ready to marry someone whose past has that much darkness," I said. "Not until I know he's faced it fully. Not until I see him doing something more than surviving it quietly." He looked down, nodding. "That's fair." Then he looked up at me. "I wanted to forget it. For years. I convinced myself that staying silent was better than reopening wounds. But that's just another way of protecting yourself," I said gently. "It doesn't make you safe. Makes you invisible. And it leaves people like her alone." He didn't argue. I handed him back the engagement ring. Not to end it, but to pause it. To set it down and say, "We're not ready. You're not ready. And I can't carry this for you." "I'm not saying never," I said, watching his hands tremble as he held the ring. "I'm saying not like this." He nodded, eyes wet but not spilling over. "I'll go," he said. And then quietly, "Thank you for not screaming at me. I wouldn't have blamed you." I didn't respond. Because in that moment, there wasn't anger. There was just grief for the love I thought we had, and the version of him I wanted to believe in. The days that followed felt hollow. I went back to work. Friends texted. My mom tried to stay close without pushing. And I told no one, not yet, about the ring or the photo, or the truth behind the story that unfolded like a bomb at what was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life. But in the quiet, I started to see things clearly. I started therapy. I journaled like my life depended on it. And I reached out to Allison one more time. Not to ask for more. Not to probe. Just to say thank you. And she replied, "You deserve to be free of his silence. I hope you find someone who shows up when it counts." I think deep down I knew I already had me. Then, 1 week later, Jordan sent me an email. No emojis. No long preamble. Just a scanned letter. It was a statement he had written for a survivor advocacy group in his city. Not anonymous. Fully signed. He told the story. Not just what he saw, but what he failed to do. He named his shame, his regret, and the way he had hidden behind the idea that being a bystander made him innocent. It was raw, imperfect, but real. I read it 3 times before I finally cried. Because that wasn't the boy from the alley. That was a man finally standing up, if only decades too late. 3 weeks after Jordan sent that letter, he asked if we could meet. Not to fix anything, he said. Not to convince me. Just to talk. I agreed, partly because I was curious, partly because some part of me still cared. Love doesn't evaporate overnight, even when trust cracks. It lingers, quieter but not gone, like smoke after a fire. We met at a park halfway between our apartments. It was cold. The kind of gray Pacific Northwest afternoon where everything smells like wet leaves and wood smoke. He was already sitting on a bench when I arrived. I sat beside him. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, I broke the silence. "I read what you wrote." He nodded. "I didn't do it to win you back. I know. But I had to stop hiding. Even from myself." I looked at him. "Why now?" He shrugged slightly. "Because when you left, I realized it wasn't just about you. It was about the way I've lived my life, always hoping that silence would make the past disappear. That if I didn't speak of it, it couldn't define me." He looked up at the trees above us, bare and rattling in the wind. "But silence is a definition," he said. "And it's not the one I want anymore." We sat in that truth. Then I asked, "Do you think you're ready to be someone different now?" He didn't rush the answer. He just looked down at his hands. "I think I'm trying," he said. "And that's more than I've done before." We didn't get back together that day. In fact, we didn't talk about the engagement at all. Because what we needed wasn't a decision about us. What we needed was distance, space, and truth. And I knew something I hadn't known 3 weeks ago. I didn't want to marry someone I had to pull toward integrity. I wanted someone already walking toward it on their own. Maybe someday Jordan would be that man. Maybe not. But I had finally stopped waiting to be rescued from the doubts that had been with me since that night in the backyard, when a photograph shattered everything I thought was solid. 6 months later, I went to another talk. This time, Allison was speaking at a high school assembly. I sat in the back row again, unnoticed. She was stronger now. More composed, more confident. Her voice had a calm fire to it, measured but fierce. At the end, during the Q&A, a teenager stood up and asked, "What would you say to the people who saw and didn't act?" Allison took a deep breath, and then said, "I would say, you have a second chance. Use it. Do better now. Not for me, but for the next person who needs you to be brave." I left the auditorium with tears in my eyes. Not just for her, but for me. Because I had been brave too. Not in a courtroom. Not in an alley. But in the quiet decision to walk away from something that wasn't whole, even when my heart wanted to pretend it was. I never told most people what happened that night at the engagement party. Not the full truth. Some still think we just drifted apart. That we weren't ready. And that's okay. Because the truth isn't always for everyone. Sometimes it's just for you. And if you're still reading this, still here with me, I want to thank you. If you've ever questioned what you were building with someone. If you've ever stood at the edge of a life you thought you wanted, only to realize the foundation was cracked. If you've ever chosen the hard truth over the easy story. Subscribe to this channel. Not for the drama, but for the healing. For the stories that remind you that you're allowed to grow. Allowed to change, allowed to stop being the quiet one and start being the strong one. We post stories like this every week. Real, emotional, and unflinching. You're not alone. And sometimes, surviving isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of who you're about to become. Lauren.